Hello, viewers. This is Dr. Qamar Cheema with my English channel, The New World. And I have with me Mr. Said Muhammad Ali, who is a Islamabad-based analyst and researcher and scholar. Thank you very much, Said Muhammad Ali, for your time for my YouTube channel.
Always a pleasure, Cheema Sahab, to join you.
Thank you. So, Said Muhammad Ali, today's conversation is very serious and important, and that is about President Biden's visit to Middle East. So, President Biden's visit to Middle East, what are the optics for Pakistan from this visit? What do you feel that how Pakistan should look this visit when President Biden is visiting Israel? He's talking on I2U2, having I2U2 leaders meeting, and then he's also visiting Saudi Arabia. So, what how Pakistanis establishment, state, society, what optics do you think we were collecting from this visit?
I think it's a very significant visit at the global, regional, and bilateral level as well. For Pakistan, it will have very profound and far-reaching implications. Uh, there are three critical pillars of Pakistan's foreign policy. Pakistan's relations with the great powers, number one. Pakistan's close relations with the Arab world, both for economic and energy needs. And number three, um, Pakistan heavily and has traditionally relied on OIC and the Muslim world's support within UNGA and UN Human Rights Council to gather some diplomatic support on the Kashmir issue. So while we are seeing the emergence of a new era in the Middle Eastern geopolitics, I think it will affect all these three critical pillars of Pakistan's foreign policy. Because during the Cold War, you would recall, Pakistan was security, economically, and diplomatically dependent on the US and the Western Bloc. And Pakistan's close relations with the Arab world, sending of large number of our diaspora, which enable significant remittances and oil supply on concessionary terms, was also made possible because Pakistan had an overarching favorable relationship with Washington, even if they were not close. But now, after the Abraham Accord and also the Quad 2.0, what has happened that India seems to be the most important US ally, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but its presence in the Quad 2.0 is also very significant because it is not geographically located in the Middle East. So this indicates and proves that both the US and the Arab countries view India's growing role in both security and economic domains as very important in the coming days. Now, this will have implications for Pakistan. Now, expecting these countries, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, and those countries which have formally recognized Israel, including UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, expecting them to raise voices on the Palestinian issue and also support Pakistan on Kashmir issue against India might become more challenging and difficult for Pakistan. That's one thing. Secondly, and I've also traveled in the Middle East. Pakistan has a large diaspora in the Arab world, which is a source of very significant economic support for Pakistan's economy, and also we get oil on concessionary terms. But unfortunately, most of the Pakistani diaspora is semi-skilled or low-skilled. They therefore do not enjoy political clout, influence, either economically or politically in these countries. Whereas the quality of Indian human resource is remarkably superior. And with the building of the new Neom city and the support of the US and the encouragement of the US, India is likely to massively build close economic relations in the high tech sector, in the industrial sector, in the energy sector, with the Arab world in general and Saudi Arabia in particular. Now, this means that these people will also enjoy political clout and influence over the policies of these countries, just like they have done in the US and in the Beltway. So this means in the coming days there will be more economic challenges for Pakistan. It is also possible that with the liberalization of the Arab society and the advancement and modernization of Arab economies, maybe the semi-skilled and low-skilled human resource of Pakistan may not be needed for a very long term. Now, this is a serious threat to our economic security if there is a significant decline in our overseas remittances from the Arab world in the coming years. And that is the second aspect. The third aspect is that if India builds close military ties with Israel and US, but also with the Arab countries. You know, Pakistan has traditionally maintained close military ties with most Arab countries. Their military services have been trained, equipped, and advised by Pakistan. Now, if uh, these countries also, consistent with the building of economic and technological relations with US, Israel, and India, reduce its military cooperation with Pakistan, then that will also raise challenges for Pakistan and reduce its security leverage over the goodwill that it enjoys within the Arab world. So to cut it short, to summarize, this visit is part of the US effort to develop the Arab world as a sphere of the Israeli influence, mainstream and accelerate their cooperation, and encourage their building of social, economic, technological, and eventually security relations. So it will have implications for Pakistan's foreign policy. It will have implications for Pakistan's economy. It will have implications for Pakistan's security as well.
So, Sayyid Muhammad Ali, what you are talking is that this has basically raised the alarm bells in Pakistan that if India is getting closer with the Middle Eastern countries, which is getting closer, obviously, which is closer, in fact, I would say, because UAE, India having a bilateral trade by 2030 around 100 billion dollars, and the Saudi military chief visited India as well. So, and the Indians are visiting. So, do you think that that Pakistan's, uh, I would call it, or I would say it this way, that Pakistan has been selling religion, or Pakistan has been using maybe religion as a commodity, or Pakistan has been overrating religion as a bond between the Muslim world and Pakistan. Do you think that somehow there is a downfall of that bond, or do you believe that the bond will stay there, but the new actors have come and those actors are cooperating on the basis of common interest, which is trade and economy, and the Muslim world need a new bond, and that bond can only come, or that unity can only come if there are shared economic interests among the Muslim world.
Uh, I think it's a very important question, Dr. Jima. I think at the popular level, um, majority of Pakistanis view Pakistan's close, deep relations with the Arab world in general and the House of Saud in particular with great reverence. I think it is considered emotionally, ideologically, the closest and most important country for the common Pakistani. But it is also important that these relations at the popular level, at the social level, were anchored in common religion, common ideology. Uh, but they were also reinforced um, geopolitically, geoeconomically. Pakistan, after our problems with Washington after the 65 war and 71 war, sent large number of Pakistanis to help build the oil industry of the Arab world. But Now this is not a normative or moral argument. This is realpolitik, because this is geopolitics. Now the Arab world has realized that they may not be able to need large number of low tech, low skilled labor for the long term future, for a number of reasons. I don't want to go into the energy politics, but they have sort of decided that in the next 20-30 years they need to diversify their dependence as well as reliance on the energy exports by developing their industry, by becoming investment hub. Like you mentioned about UAE is the biggest trading hub in the Middle East. It's not just an oil exporting country. You go to Qatar, you go to Dubai, you see multinational companies headed and managed by Europeans and Americans. They also, I've been to Doha a number of times. I've seen, in the American university campuses established in the Middle East, American faculty members are teaching, and they look for lucrative jobs and comfortable lifestyle, which may not be possible even in their own country. So it's not just oil or nothing. And I think the Saudi leadership, the new leadership, particularly Mr. Mohammed bin Salman, have recognized that relying only on oil as the leverage, as the source of revenue, is not a wise approach. So he's looking at building a new Saudi Arabia in which the society is liberal and moderate, which allows people from other ideologies, including Christians and Jews, to come and invest and do business there and provide opportunities for jobs and profit to the Arab citizens, which are who are obviously Muslims. So I think if you see in geopolitical context, it is a very important reality check, Dr. Cheema, for Pakistani nation. That let me give you the Saudi example very quickly and briefly. The Saudis have been funding a lot of religious seminaries and people in Pakistan. They've been providing economic relief to Pakistan, but they have also helped establish a very large oil refinery in India. They are also developing their economic ties with China. And only yesterday I was reading, and let me share with your audience a very interesting discovery that I was not aware of. After the Ukraine war, you know, uh, US and the Western Alliance have attempted to impose sanctions on Russia due to Ukraine war by trying to limit the price at which the Russian oil can be sold internationally. Now, Saudi Arabia is importing cheap Russian oil to meet its own energy and electricity needs, while exporting its own more expensive and profitable oil to the international market. So, this proves these two examples, close relations and economic investment in India and buying oil. Saudi Arabia is the second largest exporter of oil in the world. It is buying cheap oil from Russia for its own needs and selling its more expensive and more profitable oil to the rest of the world. So you see no role of religion or ideology here. What do I learn as a student of international relations and international politics, Dr. Cheema? That Saudi Arabia is a good example for even Pakistan, that when it comes to their own national interest, their own geoeconomic interest, they build ties with Russia, they invest in India, they reduce hostility with Israel. So they do not allow religion to interfere with their national interest and also their economic interest. And I think this is a useful lesson for the Pakistani people.
This is obviously a useful lesson for the Pakistani people. But obviously, this is something obviously which is very alarming as well for the Pakistan, since you have raised that the Indians can come in and the job market can be affected, the defense ties even can be accommodated. over the long period of time, looking at these defense ties, and since this Biden's visit in Middle East is having an impact on Pakistan, because if it is not having a direct impact in Pakistan, after some years we can see some results. At some point, Mr. Said Muhammad Ali, since you look security issues very carefully and very closely, you watch that. Do you think that the Indian army can take over Pakistan's role in Middle East by training the Saudi forces or training other forces in the Middle East? Because Pakistan for long have been overestimating this power of religion, maybe where we have been saying that yes, they are Muslim countries and they need to get training only from the Pakistani soldiers. So, do you think at one point in time there is a possibility that the Indian army or the Indian forces they can start training the Saudis earlier? The Americans have been doing this. Pakistan has been doing this. So, do you see some sort of engagement on defense side between Arab world
I
and
think I think not in the short term or medium term. It's not a imminent and immediate threat, but in the long term, definitely. And let me explain why. There are three reasons. One is the obviously Pakistan enjoys a degree of trust and goodwill because Pakistani Army, Air Force, and Navy helped establish and set up and raise these services in the Arab world. We fought on their side as well in 65 war, 73 war. We continue to send our serving officers as military advisors in these three services. We advise them even on the procurement policies of their weapon systems. We also train them, and I've taught at NDU. A large number of the Arab brothers visit Pakistan to undergo training at our staff college, at National Defense University, even at the Foreign Service Academy as well. So we have a historic, deep, long-standing ties. So that degree of trust may not be possible for India to win immediately. However, and also there is another technological reason as well, which is partly related to why US does not impose CARTSA related sanctions on India after buying S-400. It is related because despite close relations with Washington, India's Army, Air Force, and Navy are still heavily dependent on the hardware and weapon systems of Russian origin. So strategically, diplomatically, their ties are building and they are getting access to American weapon systems, but they cannot overnight get rid of the Russian hardware, and they don't want to as well because they want to diversify the sources. Same is the case with the Arab countries. They are heavily dependent on the US weapon systems, on British weapon systems, and some French weapon systems. So you see, in terms of their procurement policy, the Saudis have been procuring American weapons. They have F-15s, F-16s, but they also have Tornadoes. They have European fighter aircraft and French weapon systems as well. So what does that mean? They are heavily dependent on the Western weapon system only. There's hardly anything of Chinese or Russian origin. So since Pakistani forces also use American, British, and French weapon systems, besides Chinese, of course, so we are qualified and experienced in training them over those weapon systems. The Indians may not be able to provide advice or training on American weapon systems because they themselves are not heavily dependent on American weapon systems. So how can they advise the Arab Air Force, Navy, and Army how to run weapon systems, how to manage, repair, acquire the American weapon systems? So that's an advantage here as well. But in the long term, because I see this current warming up of the Arab world's ties with Israel, uh, which is facilitated and encouraged by Washington, in a strategic context, I see a 10-year long roadmap in which gradually and incrementally the society will be liberalized. It will encourage modernization of society and economy, greater investment from and joint ventures and business ventures with the Israelis, with the Arab world, and then that will gradually lead to reducing of mutual concerns, and then that will influence the diplomatic relations, and eventually the more sensitive security cooperation aspects will be discussed. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight or all at the same time. I see a strategic roadmap in which in 10 years time you will see India, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia having close political, economic, social, and eventually security ties with Israel and India. So, what Pakistani strategic thinkers, diplomats, and leadership should do today is to plan for that time, when so that we use the next 5 to 10 years to diversify our relations with other power centers, with exploring other export markets, and developing the type of human resource which can be considered favorably attractive and useful in the modernizing Arab societies, not just sending cheap labor over there.
That is very important, and I think that strategic roadmap need to be set. And I think India is all set for that, because we have seen that some investments are coming from Middle Eastern countries, even in Kashmir, even, and overall in
Yes.
India. So we have to look at that very carefully. That how this mainstreaming of India in Middle East is going to impact Pakistan.
I just want to add one thing, Joseph. As an afterthought, I was reading some useful analysis recently, and I wanted to share that although Saudi Arabia is the uh, pivot of the Arab world, let me put it that way. So, what even according to the Abraham Accord, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan have formally established relations with Israel, but but Saudi Arabia has not, because it is sensitive to the public perception, the street sentiment, and its role in the larger, as its own stature as a leader of the Muslim Ummah. But some analysts are of the view that even these countries, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, have very close relations with Saudi Arabia. So they would not have established formal diplomatic ties with Israel without the consent of Saudi Arabia. And also, they also notice the absence of criticism. This is more important, Dr. Saab. The absence of criticism from Saudi Arabia or any other major country, that why UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan are establishing formal ties with Israel. Nobody has condemned it. So this absence is more significant than willingness to establish formal ties.
Yes, and I think Pakistan must understand, and Pakistan must look into this Abraham Accord, that how much it is going to shape the new Middle East, and how to shape the relations of the Muslim world with the Western countries. And since the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, or before that, many people in Pakistan believe that Pakistan got itself distanced from the West, and I want to have a separate episode with you sometime next week, that why Pakistan got distanced from West. Although we worked very closely in fighting war against terrorism, we had a very strong cooperation, and Pakistan was working closely with the rest of the world. But with every passing day, it seems that that cooperation is has reduced. And obviously, things are not the same the way they were. But thank you very much, Dr. Saeed Muhammad Ali, for helping us to understand the Biden visit to Middle East, because it is not just about Middle East; it is also about South Asia, and not just India and Pakistan, but the entire region will be affected with this visit, because it is going to have implications strategically for the region. So, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very
Always
much
a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Saab.
for your thoughts. Thank you.